You ever feel like the digital world is just this minefield?
Mhm.
New cyber threats popping up faster than you can even say Patch Tuesday. It can feel pretty overwhelming, right? You're just constantly bombarded with news about breaches, ransomware, all these vulnerabilities. It's easy to feel like you're drowning in information overload.
Yeah.
But what if there was, say, a clearer roadmap, a structured approach to not just, understand these threats, but to actively build strong defenses for your digital stuff?
Yeah, that feeling is, well, it's really common. That sense of being overwhelmed. A lot of organizations, they kind of struggle with where to even begin their cybersecurity journey. They often implement controls, maybe a piecemeal, without a holistic view of how effective they really are overall. Today, we're going to unpack a framework that gives you exactly that. It's a prioritized, proven set of strategies, comes from the Australian Signals Directorate, and it's really designed to cut through all that noise and give you a powerful shortcut, sort of, to being well-informed and, crucially, well-protected.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Our mission today is to demystify the essential eight. We're talking about a set of really crucial mitigation strategies. We'll explore the maturity levels going from level 0 all the way up to 3. And then we're going to dive into the practical side, the nuts and bolts. How are these assessments actually carried out? What kind of evidence do you need to prove your controls are actually working? And maybe most importantly, how does all this connect to the much bigger Information Security Manual, the ISM? By the end, the idea is you'll have a really holistic view of what it truly means to be resilient, against cyber threats.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here, I think, is how the Essential 8 provides such a clear, progressive path. It really helps you enhance your cybersecurity posture. It moves way beyond just a checklist. It encourages a deep understanding of the why behind each measure, and critically, how to assess if they're actually effective. We'll show you how each control builds up a stronger defense. We'll even reveal how just one single ineffective control can actually impact an entire maturity level claim, which, raises a really important question. Are your defenses truly effective, or are they just sort of in place to satisfy some compliance check?
All right, good question. And to guide us through this deep dive, we've pulled from some incredibly comprehensive source material directly from the Australian Signals Directorate. We're talking about the Essential 8 Assessment Process Guide, which really walks us through the nuts and bolts of how these evaluations are done. Then there's the Essential 8 Maturity Model itself, which lays out those progressive levels of defense we mentioned, and also the Essential 8 Maturity Model and ISM mapping document. That one perfectly shows how these targeted strategies fit into the bigger information security manual framework. So this isn't just theory, right? It's practical, government-backed guidance from an agency that's, well, deeply embedded in real-world cyber threat intelligence and incident response. So let's start with the foundational concepts. What exactly is the Essential 8?
Okay, so the Essential 8, it emerged from the Australian Signals Directorate, or ASD. It came out of their broader strategies to mitigate cybersecurity incidents as basically the most effective ones. Now, the ASD is Australia's national authority on cybersecurity. They provide advice, assistance to government, critical infrastructure. They have really extensive experience in cyber threat intelligence, responding to cybersecurity incidents, doing penetration testing. So what this means is their recommendations aren't just arbitrary rules pulled out of thin air. They're lessons learned from real-world attacks. They've seen what works and, maybe more importantly, what doesn't work under actual pressure.
Yeah, that real-world experience is absolutely key. It's not just theory. It's born from knowing how adversaries actually operate. And it's important we understand the purpose and the scope here. It's primarily designed for internet-connected information technology, IT networks.
That's right. And while the principles, the underlying ideas, can certainly be applied to things like enterprise mobility and operational technology, OT networks, the framework wasn't specifically designed with them in mind. For instance, OT networks, they often involve safety-critical systems, right? Like industrial controls managing physical processes, think power grids, manufacturing plants, places where even a minor disruption could have, well, severe physical consequences or environmental impact. The threat models for IT versus OT, or even for, say, diverse mobile device environments, they're just fundamentally different. They need tailored strategies that might go beyond the Essential 8's core focus. You might need different controls for a critical power grid compared to a typical office network, because the consequences, the attack vectors, they can be vastly different.
All right, makes sense. So what are these 8 foundational strategies? Let's just list them out quickly. First, patch applications, keeping your software up to date. Second, patch operating systems, securing the foundation. Third, multi-factor authentication, adding layers to logins. Fourth, restrict administrative privileges, limiting who has the God mode access. Fifth, application control, stopping unauthorized software. Sixth, restrict Microsoft Office macros, a really common way bad stuff gets in. Seventh, user application hardening, making common software like browsers tougher. And finally, eighth, regular backups, your ultimate safety net, really. Okay, so these 8 strategies are the pillars. But how do we measure how well an organization is actually doing this stuff? That's where this maturity concept comes in, right?
Exactly. And this is where the Essential 8 maturity model really shines. It provides that clear progression of security posture. It defines 4 distinct levels, starting at maturity level 0 and going all the way up to 3.
Okay, let's start at the bottom then. Maturity level 0. What does that mean for an organization? Is it as bad as it sounds?
Yeah, pretty much. Maturity level 0 signifies really fundamental, significant weaknesses in an organization's overall cybersecurity posture. To put it plainly, it means they don't even meet the basic requirements of maturity level 1. And the implications of being at ML0, they're pretty severe. You're highly vulnerable to even the most basic, widely available stuff, what they call commodity tradecraft. Think common, off-the-shelf hacking tools, widely known exploits that anyone can find. It's really a starting point that indicates significant foundational work is urgently needed. Your systems could likely be compromised by relatively unsophisticated attacks.
Okay, so ML0 is not even close. What does it take to reach maturity level 1? What kind of adversaries are we trying to stop at this level?
Right, so maturity level 1, it focuses on mitigating threats from those malicious actors who are basically happy using that widely available commodity tradecraft to get access and control. These are often the opportunistic hackers. For example, they might exploit public vulnerabilities in online services that just haven't been patched yet. Simple stuff. They could use stolen credentials, reused ones, brute-forced or guessed passwords. Common social engineering, like those mass phishing campaigns we all see. That falls into this category, too. These actors are generally, looking for any victim. They'll opportunistically look for common weaknesses across lots of targets, rather than investing heavily in breaking into one specific place. If they happen to stumble onto an account with special privileges, yeah, they'll exploit it. They might even just destroy data, including backups if they can. So the key insight, really, for ML1 is establishing that baseline of foundational controls. Things that deter and detect the most common, widespread cyber threats, the kind that target everyone.
That paints a pretty clear picture. Basic threats, but still, they can have a huge impact. Okay, moving up. What does maturity level 2 involve? What's the step up in the adversary's capability here?
Okay, at maturity level 2, we're dealing with malicious actors who represent, let's say, a modest step up in capability compared to ML1. These adversaries, they're willing to invest a bit more time and effort. They use well-known tradecraft, maybe slightly more sophisticated techniques, to try and bypass controls and evade detection. This could include more targeted phishing attempts, maybe methods to get around weaker forms of multi-factor authentication. They were described as more selective in their targeting, so they might be looking for specific types of organizations or data, but they're still somewhat conservative in how much time and resource they'll spend. What's really crucial here is that ML2 builds directly upon ML1. It assumes all those ML1 requirements are already met. You absolutely cannot skip a step. The key insight for ML2 is about hardening your defenses against more targeted attacks, making it significantly harder for adversaries to bypass common security measures and stay hidden.
And then the top tier, maturity level 3. This sounds like a whole different level. Are we talking about like nation-state actors or really advanced groups?
We could be, yeah. Maturity level 3 is designed to mitigate those highly adaptive malicious actors, people who are much less reliant on public tools and techniques. These attackers, they can exploit subtle weaknesses, things like older software still hanging around, or maybe inadequate logging and monitoring that makes them hard to spot. They're willing to invest significant effort to circumvent idiosyncrasies and particular policy and technical controls within a target environment. This could involve really advanced social engineering to get around sophisticated controls, maybe stealing authentication token values to impersonate legitimate users, or gaining privileged credentials to move laterally through the network and then cover their tracks really well. These actors might be very focused on particular targets, and they'll proactively use what's called living off the land techniques. That means using built-in system tools that are already there rather than bringing their own malware, which makes detection much, much harder. Achieving ML3, it doesn't guarantee you're invulnerable, of course, but it significantly raises the bar, even for the most determined adversaries. The key insight for ML3 is really about building a truly robust, resilient defense, one that can withstand persistent, highly skilled, and adaptive adversaries who are willing to invest significant resources to breach your systems.
Okay, so it's less about fearing a specific named group and more about understanding their methods, their tradecraft. That seems like a key principle here. Organizations should consider what level of tradecraft and targeting you're aiming to mitigate, rather than just focusing on specific actor groups. That helps tailor the defenses effectively.
Precisely. And to figure out your organization's appropriate target maturity level, you need to consider a few things. How desirable are you to malicious actors? Basically, how likely are you to be targeted? Is your data valuable? Are your services critical? And then, what are the potential consequences if a cybersecurity incident does happen? You need to assess the confidentiality of your data, yes, but also the availability and integrity of your systems and data. What would the impact be? Ultimately, it's a crucial business decision. It has to be based on your organization-specific risk appetite. For instance, a small business holding only public information might reasonably aim for ML1, but, say, a critical infrastructure provider or a government agency handling classified data, they'd almost certainly target ML3.
And it's not just about hitting the target level in one area, is it? You mentioned these strategies complement each other. So organizations should aim to achieve the same maturity level across all 8 strategies before trying to move up to the next level. It's like a package deal. Does that sometimes surprise organizations? Maybe they just want to focus on 1 or 2 areas they think are the big ones.
Oh, it often does, yeah. But this package approach is absolutely crucial because weaknesses in one area can really undermine strengths in another. It creates exploitable gaps. For instance, maybe you have really robust application control, stopping unauthorized software. Great. But if your operating systems aren't patched regularly, an attacker could potentially exploit an OS vulnerability to just bypass your application control entirely. Or maybe you have strong multi-factor authentication. Excellent. But if administrative privileges are easy to compromise, an attacker could still potentially bypass your security controls that way. It's really about building a consistently strong, multi-layered defense. You know the saying, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. The Essential 8 really applies that principle directly. Neglecting one strategy can make your investment in the others much less effective.
And it's important to stress, even hitting ML3 isn't like a magic bullet, right? It's not a complete defense against absolutely everything. Organizations still need to think about additional measures beyond just these 8, pulling from the broader strategies to mitigate cybersecurity incidents and that comprehensive information security manual, the ISM.
That's a vital point, absolutely. ML3 provides a very strong baseline against sophisticated tradecraft, but it's not an end state. It can't be. Cybersecurity is a continuous process. It's about constant improvement. The ISM, for example, it contains a much wider array of controls. It covers things like governance, personnel security, physical security, supply chain risk management, and a lot more. The Essential 8 provides a critical, actionable subset of those technical controls, but a truly mature security program will always be looking for continuous improvement and a multi-layered defense strategy that addresses both technical and non-technical risks.
Okay, let's talk practicalities then. Implementation. Especially when things aren't perfectly neat and tidy. The guidance says organizations should implement the Essential 8 using a risk-based approach, and they should try to minimize exceptions and their scope. So using compensating controls, making sure only a minimum number of systems or users are impacted by an exception.
Exactly right. And any exceptions, they need a formal documentation and approval process. You can't just wave them through. Their necessity, along with any compensating controls you put in place, must be regularly monitored and reviewed, at least annually. And the critical point here, and this is stated very clearly in the guidance, the proper use of exceptions should not stop an organization from meeting a maturity level. This isn't about finding loopholes or ways around the requirements. It's about making deliberate, documented, and actively managed risk decisions.
Can you give us an example, maybe a good exception versus a bad one?
Yeah.
The source material had some good illustrations of this.
Sure. A good exception might be, let's say, an organization finds a low-risk legacy server. It runs some critical but unsupported applications, so it can't be patched easily. Instead of just leaving it vulnerable forever, they create a plan. They'll decommission it within a short time frame, say 6 months. They assign a clear risk owner. And crucially, they put strong compensating controls in place right now. Maybe they isolate the server on its own network segment, apply super strict firewall rules, implement advanced intrusion detection just around that server. Because the exception is actively managed, it's temporary, and the compensating controls provide an equivalent level of protection for that specific risk, an assessor can determine that this exception shouldn't stop the organization from reaching its target maturity level. It's a deliberate, time-bound, and mitigated risk.
Okay, that makes sense. So what's a bad exception look like?
Well, a bad exception might be if an organization uses a widely used cloud service, but it lacks multi-factor authentication. And they decide, it's not worth the time and effort to enable it, maybe because they expect users to complain or they think it'll impact convenience. If they just accept that risk without implementing strong compensating controls, and things like enforcing super complex passwords and rigorous monitoring are often hard to justify as truly equivalent to MFA, then an assessor would determine that the organization should be precluded from reaching its target maturity level. In that case, you're not really managing the risk. You're basically just ignoring a known gap. And that defeats the whole purpose of the Essential 8. You haven't met the intent of the control.
Yeah, that really highlights the difference between active risk management and just, well, passive acceptance. The formal exception process documentation also sounds quite detailed, like they want every it dotted and crossed.
Yes, it's very specific. The documentation for any exception has to include the full detail, scope, and justification for why the exception is needed. Comprehensive details about any compensating controls their scope, justification, how long they're expected to be needed, the next review date. The system's risk rating before and after implementing those compensating controls. Any caveats placed on the system's use because of the exception. Clear acceptance of the remaining residual risk by an appropriate authority within the organization, and a specific date for the next review of the exception's necessity, and that cannot be approved for longer than 1 year. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this level of rigor really ensures that every single exception is a conscious risk decision, not just a convenient workaround. It forces transparency and accountability for the organization's security posture.
Okay, so we get the levels, we get how exceptions work. Now let's turn to the nuts and bolts of how these defenses are actually assessed. The Essential 8 Assessment Process Guide that details how to conduct assessments of both implementation and, crucially, the effectiveness of these controls.
Yes, this guide is fundamental for anyone doing an assessment. Assessors are expected to use their judgment, their expertise, absolutely, but they always need to incorporate this guidance. A really critical principle is ensuring that any compensating controls provide an equivalent level of protection to those recommended by the Essential 8. This maintains the overall protection against that specific level of tradecraft we talked about. It's not enough to just say, oh, we have something else instead. That something else has to actually deliver the same security outcome.
And when it comes to gathering evidence for these assessments, quality really, really matters. The guide defines 4 levels of evidence quality, from poor all the way up to excellent. Can you walk us through those?
Yeah, this is a crucial distinction. So, poor evidence is basically just a policy document or maybe a verbal statement of intent, like seeing a control mentioned in policy or talking about it in an interview. This tells you what should be happening, maybe, but not if it is actually happening. It's intent, not execution. Then you have fair evidence. This involves reviewing a copy of a system's configuration, think screenshots or reports generated from the system. This is better. It shows the configuration settings, but it's static. It's a snapshot in time, and it could be misleading if the live system is actually different. Moving up, good evidence is reviewing the configuration of a system directly through its interface. You're looking at the live system to confirm it enforces the policy you expect. This is much more reliable because you're seeing it in real time.
And the gold standard, excellent evidence.
Right. Excellent evidence is actually testing a control, using some kind of simulated activity designed to confirm it's in place and it's effective. An example might be attempting to run a specific test file to check if application control rule sets are actually blocking it as expected, or trying to log in with the wrong password multiple times to verify that account lockout mechanisms kick in properly. This level of evidence proves the control actually works in practice, not just that it's configured or somebody says it's configured. It's the most reliable way to gain assurance because it validates the function, not just the presence on paper. Assessors should always aim to gather and use the highest quality evidence possible where it's reasonably practical to do so.
Okay, so after gathering all that evidence, how is the effective implementation of these mitigation strategies actually determined? It sounds like there's a very clear, almost strict threshold.
It's a combination, really. Assessor judgment plays a part, but it's guided by several factors. This includes whether a risk-based approach was adopted, the ability to test strategies across a representative sample workstations, servers, network devices, the level of assurance you get from the quality of the evidence collected, obviously, and whether any exceptions are properly managed and approved according to those strict criteria we discussed. The ASD also uses standardized assessment outcomes, things like not assessed, effective, alternate control, meaning a compensating control is effective, ineffective, no visibility, not implemented, and not applicable.
And there's a really critical rule here about risk acceptance. It seems like you can't just accept your way out of implementing a whole strategy.
You absolutely cannot. That's a key point. Assessors must not allow risk acceptance as a justification for not implementing an entire mitigation strategy unless there are adequate compensating controls in place that provide equivalent protection. So if a system owner just says, we accept the risk of not having application control, or we accept the risk of not having MFA everywhere without those strong, documented, effective compensating controls, then that whole strategy is considered not implemented. And that has pretty significant implications for the overall assessment outcome.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting and maybe a bit unforgiving for organizations. You can't just tick most of the boxes for a strategy, right? It sounds like it's an all-or-nothing deal for each mitigation strategy to hit that maturity level. So what does this actually mean for someone trying to get compliant or reach a certain level?
It means that for a system owner to claim a specific mitigation strategy is implemented at a certain maturity level, every single one of the specified controls within that strategy for that level must be assessed as either effective or alternate control. If even one single control within that strategy is assessed as ineffective, then the system owner cannot claim to have met the requirements for that maturity level for that specific strategy. And taking it a step further, if one or more of the 8 mitigation strategies are deemed to have not been implemented at all, maybe due to that risk acceptance issue we just talked about, then the target maturity level for the entire system cannot be claimed. It really highlights the importance of comprehensive, thorough, and effective implementation across every single control within every strategy. It's not about getting partial credit. It's about closing all the known gaps for that level.
Wow, that's a high bar.
Yeah.
But I guess it makes sense if you're genuinely trying to defend against determined adversaries. Okay, let's break down the actual Essential 8 assessment process. The guide outlines 4 distinct stages. First up is Stage 1, assessment planning and preparation.
Right. This initial stage is absolutely crucial. It sets the groundwork for everything that follows. The assessor conducts detailed planning activities with the system owner. This involves discussing the assessment scope, the approach they'll take, clarifying access requirements, what unprivileged or privileged accounts are needed, access to devices, documentation, personnel, maybe even physical facilities. It's also where they secure any necessary approvals for running diagnostic scripts or tools on the system. You don't just start running things. They'll discuss how evidence will be collected, how it will be protected, where the final security assessment report will actually be developed. Identifying key stakeholders, service provider contact, that's important too. They'll also check if there are any prior assessment reports available and establish ground rules for how the final report will be used, retained, maybe even marketed. Often, assessors will develop a formal assessment test plan to share with the system owner. This ensures transparency and alignment before any actual testing kicks off.
That sounds like a lot of upfront coordination, just making sure everyone's on the same page before diving in. Okay, moving to Stage 2, determination of assessment scope and approach. How is the scope defined, especially thinking about those maturity levels?
Right. So in this stage, the assessor and the system owner clarify the target maturity level for the assessment. And it's vital to remember, as we said, the Essential 8 must be implemented and assessed as a package. You can't just jump ahead. You cannot start assessing maturity level 2 without first demonstrating that you've achieved maturity level 1 across all 8 strategies. Same for ML3, building on ML2. This sequential approach ensures those foundational security measures are solidly in place before you tackle the more advanced threats. Once that target maturity level is agreed upon, the assessor really familiarizes themselves with its specific requirements because those directly impact which system components are in scope for testing. And all of this, the scope, the target level, justifications for any exclusions must be clearly documented in the final security assessment report.
And what about the assessment approach itself? How do assessors choose their methods? Is there a preference for certain techniques?
Well, they consider both qualitative and quantitative testing techniques. Qualitative includes things like reviewing policy documents, conducting interviews with key personnel, standard stuff. However, the guidance explicitly highlights quantitative techniques like direct system configuration reviews, and especially the use of automated scripts and tools as being superior for assessing many of the controls. Automated tools can assess many workstations and servers across a network much more efficiently. They can identify issues that human manual analysis might easily miss, especially in a large environment. If the organization being assessed doesn't have adequate tools themselves, assessors might use their own, provided they get clear approval from the system owner first. Sample sizes for testing are also determined here, ensuring a representative sample of devices is checked. And importantly, any limitations encountered during the assessment may be related to sample sizes or technical constraints on testing those, must also be documented transparently in the report. This really raises an important question for anyone being assessed. How much confidence can you truly have in an assessment that relies only on, say, static screenshots and verbal confirmations? The guidance clearly prioritizes that excellent evidence, the kind that proves functionality, and for good reason. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's about moving beyond just a compliance check towards a genuine validation of security effectiveness.
Absolutely. Okay, now we get to the real core of the assessment, stage 3, assessment of controls. This is where we dive deep into each of the 8 mitigation strategies and how they're assessed across those maturity levels. And it's worth remembering, assessment guidance is cumulative. ML2 guidance focuses on what's new above ML1, and ML3 focuses on what's unique above ML2.
Exactly. Let's start with strategy number 1, patch applications. The context here is pretty straightforward, right? Software vendors release updates constantly to fix vulnerabilities. Critical vulnerabilities need to be addressed super quickly before attackers can jump on them. The challenge is always knowing what software you actually have installed, figuring out what's vulnerable, and then applying those updates consistently and quickly.
So how does that translate into assessment criteria for maturity level 1 for patch applications?
Okay, at ML1, the focus is really on discovering your application assets and patching the most critical ones on a regular defined schedule. This means having an automated way to discover all your applications, ideally running at least fortnightly. You need to know what's in your environment and spot any unauthorized software that might have popped up. Your vulnerability scanning tools must have up-to-date threat intelligence databases checked within 24 hours usually. You need daily scanning for internet-facing services and weekly scanning for common desktop applications. Think office suites, web browsers, email clients, PDF readers, security products. Now, the patching timelines. Critical vulnerabilities in those online services must be patched within 48 hours. Non-critical ones get 2 weeks. For those common desktop applications, patches should also be applied within 2 weeks. And finally, any applications that are no longer supported by their vendors. They must be removed entirely to eliminate those known unpatchable weaknesses. Key insight for ML1 patch apps. This level ensures you have that fundamental visibility into your application landscape and a rapid response mechanism for the most urgent, common application vulnerabilities. It closes off those easy attack vectors.
What happens as we move up to maturity level 2 for patch applications? Does it just get faster, or is the scope wider?
For ML2, the scope broadens quite significantly. It goes beyond just those common applications we listed. You now need to perform fortnightly vulnerability scanning for all other applications in your environment, not just the core ones covered in ML1. And these other applications must be patched within 1 month of a vulnerability being identified and a patch becoming available. Key insight for ML2 patch apps. This really demonstrates a commitment to a much more comprehensive patching program. It ensures that a wider range of software, including maybe less frequently used or more specialized applications, are kept secure against evolving threats.
Okay. And for maturity level 3, this is the highest bar. What changes here?
ML3, for patch applications, it tightens the timeline significantly, specifically for those desktop applications. Critical vulnerabilities in office suites, web browsers, email clients, PDF software, security products, those now must be patched within 48 hours. That aligns with the urgency we saw for critical online services back in ML1. Non-critical vulnerabilities for these same applications, they still need to be patched within 2 weeks. And finally, that requirement for removing unsupported applications. At ML3, it extends to all applications on the system, no exceptions for unsupported stuff. It emphasizes a really clean, current software environment. Key insight for ML3 patch apps. The true insight here isn't just about faster patching, though that's part of it. It's about building an automated, highly agile patching ecosystem, one that consistently eliminates that critical window of vulnerability for even sophisticated threats across your entire application landscape. It makes it incredibly difficult for an attacker to find an unpatched way in.
Right. Moving on to mitigation strategy 2, patch operating systems. Similar context here, I imagine. OS vendors publish updates, internet-facing systems are prime targets.
Yes, very similar context. Operating systems are the absolute bedrock of your digital infrastructure. If they're vulnerable, everything built on top is potentially at risk. Attackers frequently target OS vulnerabilities, especially on systems directly exposed to the internet, but internal systems matter too.
So what does maturity level 1 look like for patching the OS?
At ML1, again, similar structure to applications. You need automated asset discovery for your operating systems, at least fortnightly, paired with an up-to-date vulnerability scanner. Daily scanning is required for any internet-facing operating systems. Fortnightly scanning is needed for all workstations and any non-internet-facing servers. Patching timelines. Critical internet-facing OS vulnerabilities need patching within 48 hours. Non-critical ones get 2 months. Workstations and those non-internet-facing servers, they generally have a 1-month patching window for vulnerabilities. And crucially, just like with apps, any operating systems that are no longer supported by their vendors must be replaced. You can't leave known, unaddressed OS vulnerabilities sitting around. Key insight for ML1 PatchOS. This level ensures you have that fundamental, regular process for finding and fixing known vulnerabilities in your operating systems, with a particular focus on the internet-facing systems that are most exposed.
Okay. What about maturity level 2 for patch operating systems? The outline we had mentioned, none, same as ML1. That seems interesting. Why no change?
It is interesting, yeah. This basically signifies that the core patching cadence for operating systems established back in ML1 is considered robust enough against the kind of tradecraft expected at ML2. The improvements needed to really thwart ML2 adversaries tend to come more from other Essential 8 strategies rather than just accelerating the basic OS patching schedule even further. However, Maturity Level 3 does introduce significant additions.
Okay. So what does ML3 bring for OS patching? It sounds like we might be getting into deeper layers of the system here.
Exactly right. At ML3, you're now looking at fortnightly vulnerability scanning, not just for the operating systems themselves, but also for drivers and firmware. Drivers, allow your OS to talk to hardware. Firmware is that low-level software embedded right into the hardware components. Both are increasingly targeted by sophisticated attackers. Patching timelines also tighten up internally. Critical patches for workstations and non-internet-facing operating systems must now be applied within 48 hours, matching the urgency previously applied only to internet-facing systems. Drivers and firmware also get that critical 48-hour patching window, with non-critical patches needing to be applied within 1 month. And finally, organizations are expected to use the latest or the previous OS release. This goes beyond just using supported versions. It ensures they benefit from the very newest security features and mitigations built into modern operating systems. Key insight for ML3 PatchOS. This level demonstrates a really comprehensive, rapid patching capability. It extends beyond the OS itself to critical underlying components like drivers and firmware. It ensures the entire system stack is hardened against advanced persistent threats, and you're leveraging the most current security features available.
Okay. Comprehensive indeed. Next strategy. Mitigation strategy 3. Multi-factor authentication, MFA. This is, huge in cybersecurity circles, right? Often cited as one of the most effective controls out there.
Absolutely. MFA is arguably one of the single most effective controls against things like credential theft and brute force attacks, which are still incredibly common ways attackers get in. It simply adds that second layer of verification beyond just a password, something you know plus something you have, typically.
So at maturity level 1 for MFA, what's the baseline requirement?
At ML1, MFA is required for users authenticating to their organization's own online services, and also third-party online services, whenever those services handle sensitive data. If MFA is available on non-sensitive third-party services, the guidance says you should use it there too. Importantly, acceptable MFA combinations are defined. It must be something you have, like a phone app, a physical token, a security key, plus something you know, your password. Or it could be something you have that is unlocked by something you know, or like needing a PIN or a fingerprint to activate your security key before using it. Critically, biometrics alone, like just a fingerprint, not acceptable as the only factor. Why? Because biometrics aren't true secrets, they can be copied, and the matching is often probabilistic, not exact. Similarly, things like trusted signals, checking your IP address, or geolocation are explicitly not sufficient as a second factor on their own. Assessors will verify that MFA is enforced where required, and that it uses one of these acceptable factor combinations. They'll distinguish between true multi-factor authentication and maybe simpler multi-step login processes that don't meet the bar. Key insight for ML1 MFA. This level establishes that fundamental defense against stolen or guessed passwords for accessing sensitive online services. It makes it significantly harder for opportunistic attackers to gain unauthorized access, even if they manage to compromise credentials.
What about those weaker MFA methods people sometimes use, like SMS codes or those push notifications you just tap approve on? Are they good enough for ML1?
Well, they aren't explicitly excluded at ML1. However, the guidance does suggest organizations may want to avoid them if they're planning to eventually move to higher maturity levels. Why? Because those methods are increasingly subject to attacks like MFA fatigue bombing, SIM swapping to steal SMS codes, and various social engineering tricks. So, for ML1, they might provide some protection over just a password, but they're definitely not the ideal long-term solution if you're aiming for higher security.
Okay, good clarification. So maturity level 2 for MFA. What's new here? Does it just become mandatory everywhere?
ML2 significantly expands the scope of MFA, yes. It's now required for both privileged and unprivileged users when they authenticate to systems, think workstations and servers, not just online services. More importantly, the MFA used for users accessing online services must now be phishing resistant. This means using methods specifically designed to resist sophisticated phishing attempts. Things like FIDO2 security keys or smart cards are prime examples. They typically verify the legitimacy of the site you're logging into before sending any authentication credential, which stops most phishing attacks cold. For customers using your online customer services, you must provide a phishing-resistant MFA option at ML2. And beyond just implementation, ML2 introduces critical logging requirements. Successful and unsuccessful MFA login events must be centrally logged. Those logs need to be protected from unauthorized modification or deletion. And these logs, especially the ones coming from internet-facing servers, must be analyzed in a timely manner by security operations staff, your SOC maybe, to detect and identify potential cybersecurity incidents. If an incident is detected, it must be reported to the CISO and potentially the ASD as soon as possible, and then you need to enact your incident response plan. Key insight for ML2 MFA. This level prioritizes much stronger phishing-resistant MFA across a wider range of users and systems. It drastically reduces the success rate of even targeted credential theft attacks, and simultaneously it builds robust logging and incident detection capabilities to quickly spot and respond to any attempts to bypass MFA.
Wow, phishing resistance is key there. And for the top level, maturity level 3, how much more can you possibly layer onto MFA?
ML3 takes it even further. Phishing-resistant MFA is now extended to users accessing data repositories directly. So wherever your sensitive data actually resides, accessing it requires that strong authentication. For customers using your online customer services, phishing-resistant MFA is now required, not just offered as an option. This provides stronger security guarantees for your external interactions. Additionally, that requirement for timely analysis of event logs. At ML3, it's now expected not just from internet-facing servers, but also from non-internet-facing servers and workstations. This ensures a truly comprehensive logging and monitoring strategy across the entire environment, not just looking at the perimeter. Key insight for ML3 MFA. At this level, MFA becomes a pervasive, phishing-resistant defense across nearly all critical access points and data stores. It's coupled with deep visibility into authentication events everywhere. This makes it extremely difficult for even advanced adversaries to gain and maintain access through compromised credentials anywhere in your infrastructure.
Okay, really locking things down. Let's move to mitigation strategy 4. Restrict administrative privileges. This is all about controlling who has the keys to the kingdom, right? And making sure those keys aren't easily stolen or misused.
Exactly. Privileged accounts, like those with administrator rights on servers or domains, are absolute prime targets for attackers. Why? Because they offer such sweeping access to systems and data. Managing and restricting these privileges is absolutely fundamental to limiting the potential impact of a breach.
So at maturity level 1 for administrative privileges, what are the foundational controls we need to see?
At ML1, the focus is really on establishing dedicated accounts for privileged users. They should have a separate admin account, distinct from their everyday user account they use for email and browsing. Requests for privileged access need to be validated upon the first request. There needs to be a clear process with approval sought and records kept. Critically, those privileged user accounts are prevented from accessing the internet directly, no browsing, no email, unless it's strictly authorized for specific online administrative tasks, like managing a cloud service console. And if internet access is authorized for a privileged account, it must be extremely limited in scope. Privileged users also need to operate in separate privileged and unprivileged operating environments. Think using a dedicated, maybe hardened administrative workstation for sensitive tasks, not their regular desktop. Assessors will verify these separations and restrictions. They'll check that unprivileged accounts cannot log on to privileged environments, and that privileged accounts generally cannot log on to unprivileged ones. This prevents attackers from easily jumping between environments if one account gets compromised. Key insight for ML1 Restrict Admin Privs. This level creates that fundamental separation of duties and environments for privileged users. It significantly reduces the attack surface by isolating those highly potent accounts from common internet-borne threats and everyday user activities where compromises often start.
Okay, that makes sense. So what does maturity level 2 add to privileged access management? Does it get more granular, more controlled?
Yes, ML2 significantly tightens the controls. Privileged access must be disabled automatically after 12 months unless it's explicitly revalidated through that approval process. It also needs to be disabled after 45 days of inactivity. This helps prevent privilege creep, where people accumulate access they no longer need, and also gets rid of stale, unused admin accounts that could be targets. Importantly, privileged operating environments are not virtualized within unprivileged operating environments. This is a key architectural point. It means you should have physical separation, or at the very least, run the unprivileged environment as a virtual machine inside a hardened, privileged host, not the other way around, which is often seen as insecure. Administrative activities are now required to be conducted through jump servers. These are dedicated, hardened systems that act as controlled gateways for privileged access to other systems. This centralizes logging and allows for stricter enforcement of tools and policies. Credentials for things like emergency break glass accounts, local administrator accounts on workstations, and service accounts must be long, unique, unpredictable, and managed by secure system think tools like Microsoft LAPS for local admin passwords or group managed service accounts, GMSAs. And finally, comprehensive logging is introduced here too. Privileged access events, like logons, along with any changes to privileged user accounts or security groups, must be centrally logged. Those logs need to be protected from modification and analyzed in a timely manner by security operations staff to detect potential incidents. If something's found, it needs reporting following those established protocols we mentioned for MFA as well. Key insight for ML2 restrict admin privs. This level introduces much more rigorous lifecycle management for privileged access. It enforces secure administrative pathways via jump servers, strengthens credential management significantly, and adds crucial logging. All this makes it much harder for targeted adversaries to escalate privileges or persist undetected within the network.
Right, that jump server requirement is the big one. And for the highest level, maturity level 3 for administrative privileges, this must be the ultimate lockdown scenario.
Indeed. ML3 refines privileged access even further, focusing on minimizing privilege and hardening the environment. Privileged access is limited to only what is required for users to actually undertake their specific duties. This often means implementing fine-grained, role-based access control, RBAC. No more generic domain admin for everyone. Secure admin workstations, SOWs, principles must be applied to those privileged operating environments. This emphasizes advanced OS hardening, removing all unnecessary functionality, and significantly reducing the potential attack surface of those critical admin machines. Just in time, JIT administration is introduced. This is a big one. Privileged access is granted only immediately before it's needed, and only for a limited short duration, then automatically revoked afterwards. This drastically reduces the window of opportunity for attackers. Advanced memory protection features that defend against credential theft, like memory integrity, VBS, and credential guard, must be enabled on relevant systems to protect cache credentials and system integrity from common attack techniques. And finally, that requirement for timely analysis of event logs now extends to non-internet-facing servers and workstations, ensuring pervasive monitoring of privileged activity across the entire environment. Key insight for ML3 restrict admin privs. This level creates a highly dynamic and tightly controlled privileged access environment. It leverages advanced technical controls like memory protection and JIT principles to make it incredibly difficult for even sophisticated attackers to gain, maintain, or exploit privileged access.
That's a huge leap in securing admin access, especially with JIT and those memory protections. Okay, let's move to mitigation strategy 5, application control. This is about preventing unauthorized software from running, which seems like, well, a pretty fundamental defense.
It is, and it's incredibly powerful when implemented correctly. Application control solutions, whether they're built into the operating system like AppLocker or WDAC or third-party tools, basically define exactly what software is allowed to run on a system. Anything not on the approved list is blocked by default.
So at maturity level 1 for application control, what's the baseline expectation?
At ML1, application control must be implemented on workstations. That's the initial focus. It needs to be specifically applied to those common vulnerable locations where users or malware often try to drop and run executables, think user profiles, temporary folders used by the OS, web browsers, email clients. The control must restrict the execution of various file types, executables, .exe, .com, software libraries, .dll, scripts.ps1.vbs.js, installers.msi, and other potentially malicious file types allowing only an organization-approved set to run. Assessors will typically attempt to write and execute benign test files that mimic malware behavior in these vulnerable locations covering various file types to confirm the controls are actually working as intended and blocking execution. Key insight for ML1 app control. This level establishes a fundamental defense by preventing common malware and unauthorized software from executing in those typical user-controlled locations. It effectively stops a significant portion of commodity attacks that rely on dropping files there.
Okay. For maturity level 2 in application control, what's the progression? Does it expand coverage or get stricter?
Yes, ML2 significantly expands the coverage and introduces more stringent rules. Application control implementation now extends to internet-facing servers, which are obviously high-value targets. The rules are also required to be applied to all locations on the system disk, not just user profiles and temp folders. This ensures much more comprehensive coverage. Microsoft's recommended application block list is required to be implemented. This is important because it helps mitigate those living off the land techniques, where attackers try to abuse legitimate built-in system tools for malicious purposes. The rule sets themselves must be validated annually or even more frequently, and there need to be robust governance processes for managing any changes to these critical security policies. You can't just set and forget. Finally, similar to other strategies at ML2, both allowed and blocked application control events must be centrally logged. Logs need protection from modification, and timely analysis by security operations staff is required, with incident reporting following those established protocols. Key insight for ML2 app control. This level implements application control much more broadly, covering servers and endpoints comprehensively. It adds a proactive layer of defense that not only blocks unauthorized software, but also mitigates against adversaries leveraging legitimate system tools maliciously. And it's all backed by strong logging for detection.
And for maturity level 3, what's the ultimate goal for application control here?
ML3 extends application control implementation to non-internet-facing servers as well, ensuring uniform protection across the internal network. Crucially, it also requires restricting the execution of drivers to an approved set. This is a very advanced control. Drivers operate at a very low level, ring 0 usually, in the operating system, and malicious drivers can be extremely powerful and difficult to detect or remove. Microsoft's vulnerable driver block list must also be implemented as part of this. And mirroring the pattern in other ML3 strategies, timely analysis of event logs is now required from non-internet-facing servers and workstations, ensuring pervasive monitoring of exactly what code is attempting to execute or being blocked across the entire environment. Key insight for ML3 app control. This level creates a near absolute whitelist environment. It drastically limits what code can execute, even down to the driver level. This makes it exceptionally difficult for even the most sophisticated and persistent attackers to run their chosen tools or malicious code anywhere in your environment.
Wow, blocking drivers, that's serious stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, next, mitigation strategy 6. Restrict Microsoft Office macros. These have been, a vector for attacks for years and years. Why are they still such a persistent problem?
Indeed, they have. Macros, while they can be useful for automating tasks in Office, are essentially little programs. They can run current on a user's system with the user's privileges. Attackers frequently embed malicious code inside seemingly harmless Office documents, Word files, Excel spreadsheets. They use social engineering to trick users into enabling those macros, which then compromises their machine. It's a classic and still effective technique.
So at maturity level 1 for Office macros, what's the baseline for controlling them?
At ML1, the default position must be that macros are disabled for users unless they have a specific demonstrated business requirement for them. If a business need does exist, usage should be restricted, maybe only specific applications, like Excel but not Word, for specific user groups, and it needs documented approval. Critically, macros and files that originate from the internet must be blocked by default. This is a primary delivery mechanism for macro malware, often arriving via email attachments or web downloads. And Microsoft Office macro antivirus scanning needs to be enabled. This requires using a compatible antivirus solution that integrates with the Office Anti-Malware Scan Interface, AMSI, to inspect macro code for malicious patterns before it runs. Finally, these macro security settings must be locked down so they cannot be changed by end users. This is usually done via central management policies, like Group Policy or Intune, that gray out the settings in the application's trust center. This prevents users from inadvertently or intentionally weakening security. Key insight for ML1 restrict macros. This level establishes fundamental safeguards against the most common macro-based attacks. It blocks internet-sourced macros by default and ensures user settings cannot easily bypass these protections. This significantly reduces the risk of phishing and malware delivery via Office documents.
Okay, what's the additional step needed at maturity level 2 for macros?
ML2 adds a specific technical requirement. Block Microsoft Office macros from making direct calls to the underlying Windows operating system functions, specifically the Win32 APIs. This is typically achieved using attack surface reduction (ASR) rules available in Microsoft Defender or comparable third-party tools. This prevents malicious actors from leveraging the powerful functions of the Windows API directly through seemingly innocuous macros. It shuts down a key technique used by more advanced malware to gain control, persist, or download further payloads. Key insight for ML2 restrict macros. This level goes beyond just basic blocking. It prevents malicious macros from leveraging underlying system capabilities, making it much harder for more sophisticated macro-based malware to actually execute its harmful payload or establish persistence on the system.
And the most advanced protections for macros at maturity level 3, what does that involve?
At ML3, it gets very restrictive. Only macros that meet very specific criteria are allowed to execute at all. They must be either running from within a specially sandboxed environment located in a designated trusted location, which itself must be securely managed, or digitally signed by a trusted publisher using specific modern cryptographic signatures. Organizations must also have robust processes to ensure macros are actually checked for malicious code before they get signed or placed into those trusted locations. You can't just trust them blindly. Access control is key too. Only specific privileged users responsible for checking and approving macros should have the ability to write to or modify content in these trusted locations. And importantly, trusted locations should never be in user-writable areas like their profile. Furthermore, macros that are digitally signed by an untrusted publisher or signed using older, weaker signature types must be blocked from being enabled via any of your prompts, like the yellow message bar. This often requires specific policy settings to disable those potential bypass mechanisms. Finally, the list of trusted publishers within Microsoft Office must be validated annually or more frequently. Ideally, organizations should acquire their own code signing certificates to sign their internal macros, mitigating risks associated with trusting external vendors. Key insight for ML3 restrict to macros. This level implements a highly restrictive default deny approach for macros. It only allows execution from highly trusted, verified sources and locations under strict controls. This effectively neutralizes most macro-based attack vectors by eliminating almost all avenues for uncrusted code execution.
That's incredibly comprehensive. It sounds like macros are basically locked down tight at ML3. Okay, let's move to mitigation strategy 7, user application hardening. This sounds like making our everyday tools, browsers, PDF readers safer to use.
Absolutely. Many common user applications are frequent targets precisely because users interact with them constantly. Web browsers, PDF readers, Office suites. Hardening them means configuring them, often through policy, to be more resistant to common attack techniques, reducing their potential attack surface.
At maturity level 1 for user application hardening, what are the initial foundational steps?
At ML1, the key is really to eliminate known vulnerable applications and restrict obviously risky behaviors. Older web browsers, particularly Internet Explorer 11, must be disabled or removed entirely. They just lack modern security features and are prone to exploitation. Web browsers should not process Java content from the Internet. This usually means disabling Java plugins in the browser, as Java applet vulnerabilities were historically a huge attack vector. Web browsers must also be configured to not process web advertisements from the Internet. This is typically achieved using robust ad blockers, deployed via extensions or network filters, not just the browser's built-in pop-up blocker, which is often insufficient against sophisticated malvertising. And finally, web browser security settings configured via central policy must be locked down so users cannot change them. They should appear grayed out or managed by the organization, ensuring a consistent security posture across all users. Key insight for ML1 app hardening. This level establishes a baseline of user application security. It removes known vulnerable components like IE11, blocks common malicious content delivery mechanisms like drive-by downloads via ads, and prevents users from accidentally or intentionally weakening crucial security settings.
Okay. What gets added from maturity level 2 in user application hardening? Does it get into blocking specific behaviors within apps?
Yes, exactly. ML2 introduces more aggressive behavioral blocking and requires more extensive hardening based on best practices. Web browsers must be hardened using guidance from both the ASD and the specific browser vendor, like Microsoft for Edge, Google for Chrome. You should apply the most restrictive configuration where guidance might differ. Microsoft Office applications must be configured, again, usually via ASR rules, to be blocked from creating child processes, i.e. launching other programs. They should also be blocked from creating executable content directly and from injecting code into other running processes. These are all common techniques used by malware delivered via documents. Office should also be configured to prevent the activation of object linking and embedding OLE packages, which can be another way to hide and deliver malicious content. Similarly, the entire Office Productivity Suite and any PDF software used must be hardened using ASD and vendor guidance, and again, their security settings must be unchangeable by users. Crucially, ML2 introduces detailed logging requirements here. Events related to PowerShell, module logging, script block logging, transcription, and command line process creation events must be centrally logged. These logs need protection, and timely analysis, particularly from internet-facing servers, is required to spot attacker activity. This provides critical visibility into what's actually happening on systems. Key insight for ML2 app hardening. This level employs specific behavioral blocking techniques against common attack patterns used by malware within widely used applications. It significantly increases the difficulty for adversaries to execute their payloads or move laterally, and this is supported by deep logging for effective detection.
Right, that logging sounds key for spotting things that get through. And for maturity level 3, this sounds like a very proactive, almost preventative, defense posture.
It is. ML3 further reduces the potential attack surface by requiring older, often vulnerable components to be actively disabled or removed. Specifically, .NET Framework 3.5, which confusingly includes versions 2.0 and 3.0, and Windows PowerShell version 2.0 must be disabled or removed. These are often targeted by malicious actors because they lack some of the modern security functionality and logging capabilities found in later versions. PowerShell itself needs to be configured to use constrained language mode whenever possible. This significantly restricts what users, and attackers who gain user access, can do with PowerShell, preventing them from running arbitrary code or loading objects that could be used to bypass other controls. And, following the pattern, timely analysis of those PowerShell and command line event logs now extends to non-internet-facing servers and workstations, ensuring pervasive monitoring across the entire environment for any suspicious scripting or process activity. Key insight for ML3 app hardening. This level dramatically shrinks the attack surface by removing legacy components and significantly restricting powerful scripting capabilities. It forces attackers to use more complex, potentially custom techniques, while ensuring deep monitoring provides comprehensive visibility into any attempted malicious activity.
Okay, our final mitigation strategy 8. Regular backups. This is often called the last line of defense, isn't it? But what makes for a good backup strategy in the context of the Essential 8?
Indeed, backups are absolutely critical, especially for business continuity and disaster recovery, and particularly in the face of ransomware attacks which aim to encrypt or destroy data. At maturity level 1, backups of important data, applications, and system settings must be performed and retained according to defined business criticality and continuity requirements. You need a schedule. They need to be synchronized in a way that allows restoration to a common point in time across related systems, which is important for data integrity. Backups must be retained securely and resiliently. This involves thinking about encryption, both in transit and at rest, and also how quickly you can recover from them. Restoration must be tested as part of regular disaster recovery exercises, at least annually is the requirement. This isn't just about recovering a single file occasionally, business as usual recovery. It's about testing your ability to recover significant systems or data after a major incident. Documented proof of testing is key. Importantly, for ransomware defense, unprivileged user accounts must not be able to access backups belonging to other user accounts. And perhaps even more critically, unprivileged user accounts must be prevented from modifying or deleting any backups. This prevents standard user accounts, if compromised, from destroying the recovery capability. Key insight for ML1 backups. This level ensures you have that fundamental, tested backup and recovery process. It safeguards against common data loss events, including basic ransomware protection, primarily by isolating backups from general user access.
Okay, so what does maturity level 2 add to backup security? Does it start restricting privileged users as well?
Yes, exactly. ML2 extends those access restrictions to privileged user accounts, tightening the security around the backups themselves. Specifically, privileged user accounts, with the explicit exclusion of dedicated backup administrator accounts, cannot access backups belonging to other user accounts. They are also prevented from modifying and deleting backups. This means that activities like modifying backup jobs, changing retention periods, or deleting backup sets become increasingly restricted to only those dedicated backup administrator accounts. This limits the potential blast radius if a general administrator account, like a domain admin, gets compromised. Key insight for ML2 backups. This level significantly enhances backup integrity by isolating backups even from general privileged user access. It makes it much harder for an attacker who has compromised a standard administrator account to tamper with or destroy your critical recovery data.
And maturity level 3 takes this isolation concept even further, doesn't it? This sounds like an extreme level of protection for backups.
Yes, the progression here really shows an escalating level of isolation and control over the backups. It demonstrates the maturity model's clear intent to thwart increasingly sophisticated attackers, even those who might gain highly privileged access, like domain admin or even backup admin rights. At ML3, unprivileged user accounts cannot access their own backups at all. Similarly, privileged user accounts, again excluding dedicated backup administrators, cannot access their own backups. Finally, and this is the most stringent control, the dedicated backup administrator accounts themselves are prevented from modifying and deleting backups during their defined retention period. Any such activity during the retention period should be restricted to special break glass accounts, which are used only in extreme emergencies and under very strict, highly audited controls. This minimizes the risk of even a compromised backup admin account being able to destroy vital recovery data before it's time. Key insight for ML3 backups. This level implements extreme isolation for backups. It ensures that even if an attacker gains control of highly privileged accounts, potentially including backup administrators, they are significantly hampered in their ability to destroy or tamper with recovery data. This provides the highest level of resilience against destructive attacks targeting your safety net.
Wow, restricting even the backup admins. That's serious resilience planning. Okay, so after all these controls across all 8 strategies have been assessed, we finally move to stage 4, development of the security assessment report.
Right, this is the final stage where all the findings are compiled and documented. Assessors are required to use the Essential 8 assessment report template provided by the ASD. While they can certainly brand the report with their own organization's logo or use their own formatting style, the key requirement is that all sections from the ASD template must be included. This ensures consistency, clarity, and comprehensiveness for anyone reading the report, whether it's for internal stakeholders making decisions, regulators checking compliance, or maybe even customers requiring assurance. It provides a standardized, structured way to communicate the organization's security posture against the Essential 8.
Okay, that makes sense for consistency. So, stepping back now, what does this all mean when you're looking at the bigger cybersecurity picture? If you're already familiar with the ISM, the Information Security Manual, here's where it gets really interesting, doesn't it? The Essential 8 isn't just some standalone checklist. It's actually intricately woven into the broader fabric of the ISM.
Absolutely, and this direct mapping is incredibly valuable for organizations. The ISM, as you know, is Australia's comprehensive cybersecurity framework. It's used widely by government and industry to protect systems and data from cyber threats, covering a huge range of topics from governance to physical security. The Essential 8 specifically complements the ISM. It provides a focused, prioritized subset of really critical technical controls from within that larger manual. So by implementing and assessing against the Essential 8 maturity levels, organizations are simultaneously addressing specific, crucial controls within the ISM framework. It provides a really clear pathway from high-level strategy down to granular technical implementation. It allows for a cohesive and integrated approach to cybersecurity governance. It makes it very clear that the Essential 8 is a pragmatic, actionable subset of that much larger, comprehensive security framework, focusing on mitigating the most common and impactful cyber threats.
That cohesion sounds incredibly efficient for organizations trying to manage compliance. Can you give us a few concrete examples of how specific Essential 8 requirements map directly to ISM control IDs?
Sure, absolutely. Let's look at maturity level 1 first. For patch applications, that requirement for an automated method of asset discovery at least fortnightly. That maps directly to ISM control ISM 1807, having a vulnerability scanner with up-to-date vulnerability database. That's ISM 1808. And patches for critical online services applied within 48 hours. That's ISM 1876. Jumping to multi-factor authentication, MFA, used to authenticate users to sensitive data online services, maps to ISM 1504. And the requirement that MFA uses something users have and something users know maps to the core MFA principle and ISM 1401. For restrict administrative privileges, privileged users assigned dedicated privileged user accounts maps clearly to ISM 0445. And for application control implemented on workstations is ISM 0843. So you can see how achieving ML1 directly addresses these foundational ISM controls.
Okay, that's clear. And as we go up the maturity ladder, Does the mapping continue for ML2 controls?
Yes, definitely. For maturity level 2, in patch applications, fortnightly vulnerability scanning for other applications maps to ISM 1700. For multi-factor authentication, MFA used to authenticate privileged users of systems maps to ISM 173. The requirement for phishing-resistant MFA for users of online services is ISM 1872. And that critical logging, unsuccessful MFA event centrally logged, is ISM 1683. In restricted administrative privileges, privileged access disabled after 12 months unless revalidated maps to ISM 1647, and conducting administrative activities through jump servers is ISM 1387. Application control at ML2 sees application control implemented on internet-facing servers mapped to ISM 1490, and implementing Microsoft's recommended application block list maps to ISM 1412. For user application hardening, web browsers are hardened using ASD and vendor hardening guidance maps to ISM 1412, and ensuring PowerShell module logging, script block logging, and transcription events are centrally logged maps to ISM 1623. You can clearly see the corresponding ISM controls becoming more specific and technically detailed as the maturity level increases.
That's a lot of alignment, showing a really clear path for implementation within the broader framework. What about the top tier, maturity level 3? Does the mapping hold for those advanced controls too?
Absolutely. At ML3, the mapping becomes even more precise, often linking to very specific advanced security controls within the ISM. For patch operating systems, fortnightly vulnerability scanning for drivers maps to ISM 1703, and the requirement to use the latest release or the previous release of operating systems maps to ISM 1407. In multi-factor authentication, MFA used to authenticate users of data repositories is ISM 1505. And requiring phishing-resistant MFA for customers of online customer services is ISM 1874. Restrict administrative privileges at ML3 has several key mappings. Privilege access limited to only what is required is ISM 1508. Using secure admin workstations maps to ISM 1898. Implementing just-in-time administration maps to ISM 1849. Even though specific technical functionalities like memory integrity functionality is enabled, ISM 1896, and credential guard functionality is enabled, ISM 1686, are explicitly linked to ISM controls. Application control at ML3 includes application control implemented on non-internet-facing servers, ISM 1656, and application control restricts the execution of drivers, ISM 1658, with Microsoft's vulnerable driver block list mapping to ISM 1659. For restrict Microsoft Office macros, the rule that only Microsoft Office macros running from within a sandboxed environment, a trusted location, or that are digitally signed by a trusted publisher are allowed to execute maps directly to ISM 1674. User application hardening at ML3 includes disabling or removing .NET Framework 3.5, includes .NET 2.0 and 3.0, ISM 1625, and ensuring PowerShell is configured to use constrained language mode, ISM 1622. And finally, for regular backups, unprivileged user accounts cannot access their own backups maps to ISM 1813, and ensuring backup administrator accounts are prevented from modifying and deleting backups during their retention period maps to ISM 1708. This really comprehensive direct mapping reinforces that the Essential 8 isn't just some separate guide. It's a practical roadmap that's deeply integrated into broader information security governance, specifically within the ISM framework. It provides a really pragmatic way for organizations to achieve higher levels of demonstrable security maturity.
Wow. Certainly unpacked a lot today. From really understanding what commodity tradecraft means for maturity level 1, all the way up to the critical role of phishing-resistant MFA in level 2, and those advanced protections like just-in-time administration in level 3. We also explored how assessments aren't just about, ticking boxes. It's about proving effectiveness through solid evidence, everything from reviewing live configurations to actually running simulated attacks, and then seeing how it all maps so clearly to the ISM. It really connects the dots, doesn't it? It shows the cohesive nature of these cybersecurity frameworks when used properly.
Indeed, it does. The journey through the essential immaturity levels, it clearly illustrates that cybersecurity isn't some one-time fix you can just buy off the shelf. It's a continuous evolution. It's about constantly improving your defenses against increasingly sophisticated threats. Each step really builds upon the last, culminating in a more robust security posture, one that's both proactively hardened and thoroughly verifiable through assessment. That emphasis on evidence quality, on meticulous exception management, and the sequential nature of progressing through the maturity levels, these are all foundational to building truly effective security.
So here's maybe a thought for you, the listener, to chew on. If you walked into your organization tomorrow and a really determined malicious actor decided you were their specific target, what maturity level would your defenses truly be operating at? Right now, And maybe, what's one step armed with this deep dive information that you could realistically take this week to start moving that needle even just a little bit towards a higher level of resilience?
Yeah, and that raises an important question, doesn't it? Is your cybersecurity strategy merely meeting some basic compliance requirement, or is it genuinely designed to withstand adaptive, persistent threats? Remember, the ultimate goal here isn't just to implement a list of controls. It's really about fostering a culture of continuous improvement, questioning assumptions, ensuring that every layer of your defense is genuinely effective. So maybe ask yourself, what's one area where you could push for excellent evidence, that real proof of effectiveness, rather than just settling for fair evidence like a screenshot? Maybe an area where you feel you might be just checking the box right now. Validating that one area properly could make a real difference.
Some great points to consider. We really hope this deep dive has given you some surprising facts, maybe a few aha moments along the way. We definitely encourage you to revisit your own cybersecurity practices with this Essential 8 framework in mind. Perhaps even download those ASD guides we mentioned for a deeper self-assessment if it's relevant for you. Remember, gaining knowledge quickly is one thing, but actually applying it, that's where the real value lies. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay secure.